Good afternoon, everybody. This is Gareth Taylor from the Pen Company. I hope you're looking forward to this webinar. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Chris, who's going to be managing today's webinar from Consulting. Just to give you a bit of background on Chris to start with. Chris started his organizational life in both ICI and Barclays. I moved into consultancy with KPMG and PA Consulting, I'm sure you've all heard of, before starting his own business, Sixth Sense, which started in 2010 with Chris is a fully qualified coach and psychotherapist and has a deep personal interest the well-being of people, especially people at work, and is an expert on that subject. Chris and Jackie also published authors of 2 books, Staying Sane in Business and Mindful Balance in Business. Chris will pick up from now. Just to let you know that there will be some questions, polls rather, that we're going to during the presentation, so there'll be some interaction there for you, and also there'll be a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, there is a question and answer facility on your webinar. So, Chris, thanks very much for coming, and thanks for doing this in association with Claire Assured. This is something that is users, and these their workforce, and this is a key topic for them. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Gareth. It's a real pleasure to be here, and what I'm going to do in the next 40 minutes is do a fairly quick trot through what is quite a big subject, really. This whole idea of how we look after ourselves mentally, what we do for our bodies, and how we therefore inject a bit of sensible life balance into our working lives to keep ourselves mentally, physically healthy and at the top of our game. So you're right, it is an area of deep personal interest to me, and the very least I want to do in the next 40 minutes is get a few key points across. So what I'll do every now and again is I'll pause and I'll ask a few questions. I don't expect everybody to know all the answers. In fact, I'd be slightly alarmed if everybody did know all the answers, because I didn't know them all before I started putting them together. So if anybody's a greater expert than me, that's absolutely wonderful. They can come and join me and come and join the company and come and help. And what I hope is a worthy cause. So let's start off by talking about this whole thing about resilience. Now, resilience is an interesting word insofar as the topic area has probably changed as a label over the years. I think years ago, people didn't talk about resilience, they talked about stress. And then they started talking about well-being. And indeed, they still talk about stress and talk about well-being. But actually now the word resilience has become really quite popular, and I think for a number of reasons. Partially, it's because it's a pretty good word to encompass pretty much everything, and also partially because it doesn't have any stigma associated with it. And one of the sad things about the world of mental health is that there is certainly a certain amount of stigma still associated with it, which we'd very much like people to let go of, but we accept that might take a bit of time. So let's start off with this idea of what resilience is and give it a definition. At this point, if I wasn't doing a webinar and I was doing a group-based piece of work, I'd literally open it up to the audience and ask, but I won't do that now. I'll give you what is my definition of resilience. I'm not saying it's the only definition, because it isn't the only definition, but it's a useful definition, and it's sort of stood the test of time for me anyway. Essentially, what we're looking for is some sense of what it does it take to to resist, to recover, or to adjust from stress, from change, from misfortune, and recognizing that a lot of the things that can give us the most degree of stress are not just going to happen in the workplace or necessarily just happen in our personal lives, but are often an interplay between the two. So that unique sense of trying to balance our lives is something I think which we all acutely feel. But there is something about being able to bounce back. And in order to bounce back, sometimes we need to protect ourselves, not to get damaged in the first place. And there are some practical things that we can do, and that's what I really want to spend my time talking about this afternoon. So a key point here is that the whole thing is not just as simple as toughing it out. It isn't just about mental toughness. Mental toughness is part of resilience, but it isn't the only part of resilience. It's a bit more than just that. Okay, so we all have some sense of pressure and stress in our lives. A bit of pressure is a good thing. I don't want anybody on the webinar here to think that my message is that we all need to avoid stress at all costs. And I think that would be inaccurate. If you don't have some pressure in your life, you don't have a sense of arousal, interest, piquing your kind of interest and your focus, you'll be inactive. If you look at the left-hand side of this diagram, you'd be inactive, you'd be bored, you'd have a psychological condition which is more like rust out than burnout. So what you really want to do is have some sense of your performance being at an optimal level. What, of course, we have to remember is that everybody's performance and everybody's optimal level is slightly different. So what is my peak performance isn't necessarily somebody else's. What tips me over the edge doesn't necessarily tip somebody else over the edge. So one of the important things to think about here is how do we maintain our own unique personal level of performance? Where is it? What are the things which cause us damage and difficulty? What are the things which are protective and help us stay healthy and well? But everybody is capable of going over the edge. Everybody is capable of going onto the right-hand side of that diagram. And once you go on the right-hand side, you tend to accelerate down the right-hand side faster than you came up the left-hand side. It's a bit almost like a hill. You struggle to get up the left, and then you can slide very quickly down the right-hand side into a place which is hard to recover from quite often, and therefore best avoided. Okay, so what's the problem? The problem is, there's a very good book out, actually, which you might want to have a look at, called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's an intriguing title to a very important topic, really. Animals, of course, and us share one characteristic in that we move away from things which hurt us. We move away from things which are potentially damaging. We don't necessarily always apply that sensible biological logic in our everyday life, though. So quite often we find ourselves repeatedly exposed to things which cause us to engage in the human fight or flight response. The fight or flight response is natural, it's normal. We would want to move away from things which could potentially do us damage. But the truth is, at a very low level, we can continually expose ourselves to things which cause us to feel somewhat stressed. The sustained pressure in modern life, even your mobile phone, if you're trying to do this webinar while you've got your email pinging in the background, or you've got instant messaging going, or you're thinking and your mind is half on something else, you kind of know what it feels like, this sense of being continually slightly distracted, slightly under pressure. That's one thing. The second thing is that unlike zebras and unlike other animals, the human mind is unique in the fact that it can have a sense of almost a flight simulation. The things that perhaps could go wrong in the future, the things that have gone wrong in the past. Every time you play that simulation in your mind, the recalling of something that's gone wrong, or the perhaps fantasizing about something that might go wrong in the future, every time you recall that, you get the same biochemical response in your body. Your brain doesn't really know the difference between that which comes through the eyes or any of the ears or any of the other senses and that which is imagined. So the same process goes off. Your whole body isn't particularly well adjusted to being continually over the edge, overstimulated. You need time to relax and recover. We all need time to relax and recover. Frankly, we don't give ourselves that time. And lastly, in purely survival terms, more than anything else, is that we're all much more likely to notice things that are going to do us potential harm than notice things to be happy about, to be grateful for, or to feel good about. And that's simply to alert ourselves to potential threat. But obviously, if your brain is about 5 times more sensitive to incoming negative information, which it is, then clearly you are going to have an attentional span that is easily preoccupied by things which could cause you to feel stressed. Particularly at work, if you feel that your relative level of importance in an organization is compromised, if you feel that you've been treated in an inconsistent way, if you feel that your job's being changed in a way which you don't have full say over, if your relational bonds with people have changed, or if you don't think that you've been treated fairly and equitably, you can have this whole stress reaction kicking off in pretty much the same way as if you were that zebra being chased by a lion. It's exactly the same biochemical response. So we are working with legacy kit in our heads. None of us are designed fully for the 21st century. To deny that is going to cause us lasting harm. So we do have to think about this at a level of being human. Of course, we don't always do particularly good things. Instead of recognizing that we're stressed and we're hassled and we're under too much pressure, what we're much more likely to often do is to go and reach for a cream cake, reach for the packet of crisps, go outside and smoke if we smoke, drink coffee, drink tea, drink alcohol, eat chocolate, do anything rather than deal with the nature of the stress problem. So if you think about it, you've probably got some bad habits. If you don't have any bad habits, I'm sure I do, and I'm more than happy to share some of mine with you, but now might not be the time. So thinking about the stuff that we do instead of dealing with the problem. And of course, if you look at people walking down the street these days, a constant sense of preoccupation with their mobile phones. Sometimes that's a source of stress, and sometimes it's a way of dealing with other things that are stressful. So, how many times have we picked up something like Facebook and idly swiped through Facebook when actually we're supposed to be doing something that's more important, but actually it's stressing us. So it can be a welcome distraction. It can also be a stressful distraction. So here's a quick quiz. Are you stress aware? We've posed a number of questions to you. And what we thought we'd do is invite you to have a look at the first 3 questions of our 18 questions. And these relate to just a sense of how pervasive this problem of occupational stress actually is. And the first question is simply, how many cases of work-related stress do you think were officially recorded in 2018? Do you think it was 110,000 cases, 595,000 cases, 670,000 cases, 1.2 million cases, or 2.26? So we've got a green on 40% of 595,000, which is interesting. Some people are thinking maybe a bit more, some people are thinking a bit less. Oh, it's adjusting itself nicely now as you're changing your minds. I like it. Wonderful. Okay, the correct answer to that one actually is 595,000. This is recorded in the labour force survey, which is put out every year, which collects some very accurate information about occupational stress, amongst other things. Second question, which we have, is how many cases, how many working days do you think were lost in 2018 to stress? Do you think it's 125,000, 485,000, 7.6 million, 10.2 million, or 15.4 million cases of working days lost to stress? So again, that information has been collected for all of us, and we're having a look through now with 7.6 million coming ahead. Any more for any more? 83% of you have voted now. Whoever's wandered off to go and get a coffee or a bag of crisps needs to come back and vote. 92%. Okay, so I'm going to go for the majority there. It's the majority are thinking 7.6. If anybody was feeling brave, right at the other end of the spectrum at 15.4 million, you would have been correct. In fact, it's 15.4 million cases or working days lost due to stress. In one sense, you might even see that as a tip of the iceberg, because you can imagine that a lot of cases of occupational stress actually are never reported in the first place. And a lot of people feel quite uncomfortable about talking about the whole thing. Okay, so what about the top 2 causes of occupational stress from this list? Do you think the top 2 would be, well, you can choose 2 out of any of those, but what do you think? Workload, role uncertainty, lack of control, lack of managerial support, or do you think changes at work? Okay, so we've got a little bit of workload coming up, quite a lot of managerial support, quite a lot of changes, not much of an interest in role uncertainty, so I guess we're all used to a bit of role uncertainty now. I think we're all used to lack of control as well by the look of it. Okay, so what's nudging ahead here, I think, is lack of managerial support. And that's very accurate, actually. Lack of managerial support, but actually also workload. So there's an old expression in our business that says that people join organizations and leave bosses, and it's absolutely true. One of the biggest sources of stress is your relationship with your boss. But clearly, if you've got far too much to do, you're going to be stressed out about that as well. And if you've got far too much to do and you've got a boss who doesn't care, you're going to be doubly stressed. So there's two very high cases of stress causing conditions. Right. So let's talk about the mental stuff. Where do we go? So roughly speaking, my model of stress management and resilience is as follows. We need to think about how we think. We need to think about how we rest. We need to think about how we eat. We need to think about how we exercise. And we need to think about what sort of support we get from people around us. All of those components are vitally important. I'll come on at the end to the one that's probably the most important of all. But let's think firstly about how we think. Now, there's another it's slightly pejorative in a way, and forgive me because I'm not in any way trying to be in any way judgmental, but there is a very quick way of remembering about stress, and that is stress makes you stupid. Now, what do we mean by that? What we don't mean about a reduction in IQ or anything like that. What we're meaning is stress narrows our range of felt available options. We keep coming back to the same old problem-solving techniques when we're stressed out. Our whole world becomes much more black and white and much more defined. So it doesn't really make us stupid, but it certainly doesn't make us as sophisticated in our problem solving as when we're relaxed and when we're feeling happy and creative. So stress is wonderful. Your stress response, your adrenaline-fueled, cortisol-driven stress response is brilliant for getting you out of trouble. It's brilliant for getting you to leap out of the way of the oncoming car that you didn't notice as you were preoccupied reading your mobile phone in the middle of the road. It's brilliant for that. It's not brilliant for helping you solve complex, difficult, seemingly intractable problems about people where you need a bit more subtlety. It just doesn't work so well for that. It encourages you actually to take lots of mental shortcuts that actually don't work very well. Here's a useful idea, and I find this probably one of the most useful ideas in the whole world of stress management. Every one of us has this idea of a stress container. Everybody has a certain degree of human vulnerability. Everybody has a capacity to cope, but not everybody's stress container is the same size. Everybody has a certain amount of stress that pours into the stress container. If the stress container gets overfull, it overflows, and that's where you get to the places where people feel like they're snapping, where they feel like they're heading towards a breakdown. Now, clearly, there are good things that we can do to empty the stress container. That's what I'm talking about today. The practices that we can do to form a tap at the bottom of this container to let some of the stress out. The way that we think, the way that we rest, the way we exercise, the way we relate to people, the way we eat, all have got a positive impact. We can actually make that stress container bigger or smaller by our own practices. But to a certain extent, nature bestows upon us a certain size of stress container. And the idea that my stress container is the same size as somebody else's isn't really true. Probably do myself a disservice. It might be significantly smaller than somebody else's. I might need to take significantly better care of myself than perhaps somebody else can get away with. The idea that we're all exactly the same is not helpful here. It might be helpful in other places, but it's definitely not helpful here. He said, pausing for a quick slurp of water. Okay, so what are these helpful coping strategies that we can work with then? Okay, well, let's start thinking not just about our brains, accepting that we don't solve problems terribly well when we're stressed out, but let's think about our bodies. What do we do when we're under stress and pressure to our bodies? What's the physical component of stress and pressure where we can do something positive to mitigate its worst effects? Let's start off therefore by giving ourselves a bit of a list. Now, I see 5 big topic areas really. I think the first one is making sure that we drink enough water, or we drink enough fluid. It's not necessarily just water, although I have just, not that everybody can see that, I have just stopped for a quick slurp of water, because even tea and coffee is reasonably okay. It doesn't have quite the same level of diuretic impact that people think it has. I'm talking about normal coffee, by the way, not triple espressos or anything like that. I'm just talking about normal strength coffee. But certainly plenty of fluids. So, because if we're not very well, often our medics will tell us, get plenty of fluids inside. If you're not feeling very good, you've got a cold or something like that, or something like an infectious illness, make sure you get plenty of fluids. The same really applies all the time. So we work in quite sort of desiccating environments. We've got air conditioning, we've got computers which are continually giving us a sort of drying out effect. And not having enough to drink can often leave us feeling a bit groggy. Quite a lot of kind of headaches are caused by this. Sometimes you start thinking you want to eat, but actually you're really quite thirsty. So eating and drinking is important, but drinking is really important. So if you did one thing today that would be positive, it would be making sure you have plenty of fluids and ideally plenty of fresh water. Then we've got stimulants. I'll come on to stimulants in a second. Stimulants are things like teas and coffees, which are good in moderation, but not good if you're so exhausted that you're constantly relying on them just to get yourself through the day. There are positive things that we can do to eat for resilience. There are some good ideas which are based in solid science that we can do to protect ourselves. Also some rubbish that we can eat that makes us a lot worse. I'll talk a little bit about alcohol without preaching about it, because alcohol is important, and how we drink, if we choose to drink, and if we're culturally if drink is culturally acceptable to us. But even if it is completely part of our lifestyle, we've still got to exercise a bit of control over it, I think, to be healthy. And then lastly, if we're at work, what do we reach for that's available? And if we reach for crisps and sugary things, it's usually because they're buyers, and if we put something in their place which is more healthy, that's often a lot better. Okay, so let's have a little quiz again. So I think I might have given the game away in one of them, actually, so I've probably answered the first question. If you were paying attention, you might have heard this one. So question 4 on the block was about coffee and tea. So you can't count coffee and tea as they're diuretics, true or false, for those of you who were paying attention to what I was saying. Some of you weren't, actually. Okay. The second one is, it's now getting towards summertime. It's lovely weather actually outside in Warrington today, isn't it? Beautiful, beautiful kind of. Oh, are we okay? I'm on number 4. Is that okay? Sorry, we're just having a little debate about the use of the questions here. I think, are we okay with that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, we are. Good. So so it's now getting nice and sunny. So which vitamin do you think is synthesized? You need a bit of cholesterol to make this work actually in your diet, but which vitamin is it that's synthesized by the action of sunlight? Is it A, B, C, D, or vitamin K? Okay. Everybody's gone for D. You all know your stuff. 100%. Okay. Should we move on to the next question? Okay. So for those of you who are, if you do drink and you are a responsible drinker, you will probably know this. If you're an irresponsible drinker, now's the time to hide it, probably. So how many units of alcohol do you think there are in a maximum weekly recommended intake? What do you think it is? Do you think it's 12? Is it 14, 18, 22, or 28? It's a bit of a neck and neck between 12 and 14. Okay. At the moment, it would be 14. For those of you who have chosen 12, good. It's probably even more healthy. Sometimes you see differences in recommended units of alcohol between males and females as well. Sometimes you do, with female recommendation being slightly lower due to liver size, I think, more than anything else. Okay, and then how many units of alcohol in a standard 250 milliliter glass of wine? How many do you think there's in there? If you went to a bar and ordered say a glass of 250 milliliter glass of red wine, how many units of alcohol would be in that? The interesting thing about alcohol served in wine glasses is that the wine glasses are getting rather bigger. You think about a 250 milliliter glass of wine and think about how big that is. Okay, so we've got a couple of votes for, some votes for 2, some votes for 3. The actual correct answer on that one is 3. There's 3 units of alcohol in a standard strength glass of wine at 250 ml. And lastly, if you went off and had a cholesterol test and you were looking for that magic number and your cholesterol test, what do you reckon would be the number that you'd be most interested in? Would it be 5, 7, 8, 9, or 11? So this is, it's actually millimoles per litre, but actually you never remember that bit, you just remember the number. So what would you reckon it was? Again, I think the majority is heading towards 5, so it looks like you're knowing your numbers. If you think it's 8 or 7 or 8, that's a bit too high, I'm afraid. You'd need to reduce your cholesterol to be healthy as far as current health recommendations go. So a good knowing your numbers there is good, and actually getting a cholesterol test is incredibly easy and not really very painful at all. So you get that in the chemist in about 5 minutes. Obviously get it at your doctor's, but you can get it, you know, just a finger prick now, and it's pretty accurate. So trying, not without obsessing about it, trying to keep your cholesterol around about below the 5 level is a good thing to do. Okay, so moving on, let's talk a bit more about that water thing. The recommended amount of water or fluid to take, which is mostly water, is about 2 litres a day. It's a little bit harder than you might think. It's quite easy to go through the day and not really drink enough. I think you can get to the end of the day feeling a bit headachy and a bit dehydrated and wonder why. And if you had a water bottle in front of you, you'd know why, because actually you're just not drinking enough. So a couple of litres of water a day is a very good target to go for. If you don't like the taste of the local water, it's not too bad here in the Northwest. But of course, if you're not listening here from the Northwest, you're down in London or somewhere like that, some people would say that the water there doesn't taste great and is a lot better if it's filtered. I'm personally not a great fan of bottled water. I don't think that's really necessary, but certainly it can taste an awful lot better if it's put through a filter. So a water filter isn't a bad idea. Sometimes you get them even installed at home. And if that encourages you to drink more water, so much the better. The idea of having a bottle on your desk or a glass on your desk as a reminder is a good thing, particularly if it can show you how much you've drank during the day. And if you want to, you can note it down as well and just experiment, see how your body reacts to being a bit more hydrated. Generally, you'll probably feel a lot better. Managing the stimulants, I think pretty much everybody knows what the stimulants are. I'm talking about legal stimulants, by the way. I'm not talking about things that you shouldn't be taking. I'm talking about things which are commonly available, that we reach for. But the things that we often reach for, perhaps not alcohol during the day, but definitely after the end of work, again, if you drink alcohol. But what we're probably more likely to go for at work is caffeine and coffee. Caffeine in coffee and tea, or fizzy drinks. Including the so-called diet varieties, which aren't particularly healthy, to be honest. Sometimes we get a bit of a desire to eat something, so processed food can often feel quite stimulating. And quite often we find ourselves craving sugar when we're stressed as well. So managing the stimulants is important. Trying to work to keep your blood sugar nice and level is a good tactic. So the things that you can eat then to help you be more resilient. Now, of course, eating and dietary choices are all quite personal things, and obviously have great strong cultural overlays as well. But just working within those parameters, and you may or may not eat things like fish, but if you did, then there's some ideas here. Certainly anything that's got omega-3 in it seems to be pretty good for brain health. Now, you can get omega-3 from a variety of sources. Olive oil is probably the easiest. You can do a lot of things cooking it and drizzle it on salads. If you eat fish, then wild salmon, mackerel, tuna, and anchovies are good. And if you don't, then an omega-3 supplement is easily obtainable, which is usually based on stuff like flax. Asparagus is good because it's full of vitamin E and readily available, and also things like asparagus. I say organic because on the whole there's more vitamin content within organic food, but it doesn't have to be organic, of course. Coconut oil can be very good for you in moderation, but it's very calorie dense, so you have to be a little bit careful. And the thing to be watching out for here when it comes to eating is our obsession with low fat. Whilst it was quite well informed at one stage for cardiovascular health reasons, in another one it kind of misses the point, because a lot of low fat food has got a lot of sugar in it, and if it didn't have sugar in it, it would taste fairly dreadful. So do be careful, I think, if you're going to go for food based choices to building up your resilience, that you don't fill yourself full of accidental sugar by following a low fat diet, because that isn't going to make you feel any more resilient. In fact, it's going to make you feel a lot worse. Nature is very, very helpful in this sense, in that you can drink and eat an awful lot of things, but actually the rainbow is a good indicator of what's healthy. So brightly coloured food, and you can see on that list there, broccoli, spinach, and oranges, tangerines, blueberries, and walnuts is covering quite a wide, quite a variety of colours there. And that's usually an indication that there's a lot of vitamin content in the food. And of course, this time of year, summertime of the year, is very good for salads. So you could pretty much make a salad about all of that lot and have a fantastically high nutrient meal. I'm not a huge believer personally in this idea of superfoods. I don't know if there's a lot of science based on that, but I am a huge believer in vitamin derived fresh food. I think it'd probably be the easiest way of saying it. So if your diet is a bit beige and a bit processed and a bit one coloured, then it may be a good idea to pep up the colours a bit. Okay, now one of the things that you need to watch out for if you really want to build up your resilience is sugar. Now, sugar is a real problem because a lot of it is hidden in our diets. It's not as if we're just adding it, easily to our coffees and teas and noticing it. The problem is a lot of it is not really that easy to spot. And of course, it isn't even just labeled as sugar. There's about 16 different varieties of sugar. Some of them, things like maltodextrose, glucose, obviously sucrose, dextrose, simple dextrose, and so on and so forth. You can go through all of these things and you can find you're taking out a huge amount of sugar if you're not careful. Stress already makes your body mobilize its sugar reserves. It makes you want to get more sugar. If you do that, that's fine if you've got a sort of job that involves a lot of physical activity. If you've got the sort of job that doesn't, like most of us, you're sitting probably in an office at a computer waiting for the next email to arrive, you're not going to get the opportunity to burn off the excess sugar that your body's released as a stress response, and also has made you want to go and forage for and eat. And the result is you can get a huge amount of sugar going around your body, which can get stored as fat, which obviously is a problem for you, but also can wreck your insulin systems, and in doing so can perhaps lead to health-related consequences, things like type 2 diabetes. So really, if you want to stay really resilient, I would suggest you eat food which releases its sugar slowly, complex carbohydrates and things like that. Protein is a good, obviously you tend to have that with complex carbohydrates, but stuff that doesn't give you that rapid sugar hit. Now, if you think about it, quite often that's exactly what you want. You reach for the Mars bar when you're feeling stressed, and that causes your blood sugar to spike, and then about an hour or two later you're then feeling grotty because your blood sugar's gone right down. Your body's full of insulin, it's trying to fight off all that extra sugar, and that leaves you in this horrible cycle of ups and downs of blood sugar, which in itself feels incredibly stressful. So eating in a preventative way is a really good thing. You might look for food which has got a low glycemic index or a low glycemic load, and we can provide, if anybody's interested, I'm quite happy to send a list of those sort of foodstuffs out as a supplement to this webinar. Alcohol, I think we all know about alcohol. Britain has a bit of a booze culture. We buy a lot of booze that we don't admit to, actually. If you ask people how much they drink, it seems quite different in the surveys to how much they actually buy. So unless they're storing a lot of it at home in a huge container somewhere, the likelihood is actually they're drinking a lot more than they think they're drinking. If you go back to the idea of wine glasses getting bigger, and drinking very easily 3 units of alcohol in one go, and probably not doing that, probably having 6 actually, because you've had 2 large glasses of wine, it really, really stacks up. So if you keep a log of that all week, you could be quite surprised by how many units you've actually taken on. And like alcohol is a social lubricant, we all know that, but it also can be quite a corrosive habit. Okay, so let's have a look at number 3 then. This is a slightly more technical set of questions, but I think they're worth knowing. I would imagine that it's a jolly good thing for everybody to have their blood pressure checked fairly frequently. One of the things that we know is that stress can seriously impact on your blood pressure, make your blood pressure go up. So you've got 2 blood pressure readings. You've got systolic, which is the higher one, and you've got diastolic, which is the lower one. The systolic ranges are what? So do you think, what's the ideal upper limit for your systolic? That's when you've got something over something. Systolic over diastolic is the higher reading. So 100, 110, 120, 130, or 150. Okay. Oh, you're a knowledgeable bunch, so that's good. So you're all voting pretty much for the right thing there. It's 120 is the ideal upper limit for systolic blood pressure. What about your diastolic? Your systolic is the pressure that your heart exerts when it pumps blood around the system. The diastolic pressure is the pressure between beats. So what do you think about that one? 55, 75, 80, 90, or 110? Votes for 80, looking like 80. Any advance on 80? We're going to go for 80. I think 80 is the correct answer. Okay, right. Now, what about the desirable range for body fat percentage for an average middle-aged female? That's a pretty specialist one, isn't it, really? What do you think the body fat percentage for an average middle-aged female would be? Now, recognizing that's a very, very broad category indeed, but where would you go for? Do you think it'd be 10 to 15%, 18 to 22, 25 to 31, 33 to 39, or 38 to 42? Okay, looks like level there, doesn't it? Between 18 to 22, 25 to 31. You can get away as an average middle-aged female and be classed as healthy with 25 to 31. If you're 18 to 22, you're doing pretty well, and you're probably fairly lean, actually. Obviously, your own build makes a difference there, and the amount of exercise that you do makes a huge difference. But knowing your body fat percentage and the ideal amount would be a good thing. What about the second biggest cause of workplace ill health in the UK? What do you think it is? Do you think it's coughs and colds? Do you think it's a back injury? Do you think it's headaches? Do you think it's heart trouble? Or do you think it's actually depression? What are we going there for? Quite a few votes for mental health. A few votes for headaches. Depression is coming out. I don't know if I've accidentally skewed the audience here because of my background, but it isn't actually depression, it's actually back injury. It's a very musculoskeletal injury is very, very common cause of people being off sick, but actually it's the second biggest cause, because the biggest cause is stress related. Okay, and then the last one in this series, you often see people when you go down to the gym pumping iron. Is that a good thing? Should you stop doing that in later life? Could that cause you damage? What do you think, true or false? And again, we've got some really good answers there. It is false, actually. Strength-based training is very good in later life. You tend to lose muscle tone as you get older. You tend to lose a lot of supportive strength. And if you can build up the muscles, nobody's expecting you necessarily to try and train to be Superman or Superwoman. It's just simply keeping your muscles strong and active. So some strength-based training is a really good thing in later life. It's true. Okay. So moving swiftly on, so we don't go over. How much is enough exercise? It's a common question. Well, the minimum amount of recommended exercise to stave off the chance of early death, premature death. So remember, that's to stave off the chance of premature death, not actually just the minimum amount of exercise, because none of us want to die sooner than we would naturally have an allotted span for. 30 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week. The key thing about exercise, more than anything else, is that you can count exercise into your daily routine without necessarily putting your gym kit on. You can walk, you can stand, you can stretch, you can walk to work or cycle to work. Pretty much any exercise is better than no exercise. So if you're a proud owner of a smartwatch, like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something like that, just keeping an eye on steps, keeping an eye on standing, keeping an eye on the movements that you do each day is a good thing. There is an expression in the fitness industry called NEAT. NEAT is non-exercise aerobic thermogenesis, which even I struggle with, actually. It's a bit of a mouthful. Essentially, it means moving around and expending calories without necessarily putting your gym kit on. So there's lots and lots of ways, the idea of just walking up the stairs rather than getting the elevator makes quite a difference. Recharging. Let's talk lastly about here in this bit about recharging. And in order to do that, let's have another quick quiz, just to keep you occupied and fingers on the keyboards. So question 14, how much sleep is recommended, you think, as the minimum in hours? This is the minimum amount of sleep that you would need to stay physically and psychologically healthy. And that's the amount which clears the stress chemicals, hormones, cortisol and adrenaline out of your body, particularly cortisol. And you're right, actually, we've gone largely for 100% on 7 hours. That's correct. Meditation causes structural changes to the brain. Do you think meditation, if you're engaging in meditation, would it actually cause a structural change to your brain? If we put you in a scanner and looked at your brain, could we actually see some structural changes? And you've obviously read the same research that I've read, because it's absolutely true. There are structural changes to the brain as a result of meditation. It takes about 12 weeks. You did 20 minutes of meditation 3 times a week for 12 weeks. You would have an increased thickness in your neocortex and a decreased thickness in your amygdala, which is the stress responsive part of the brain. How about Pilates? For those people who have tried Pilates, ancient discipline dating back over 2,000 years. Is that true or false? Is Pilates 2,000 years old? Bit of mind changing going on. Okay. Oh, 50-50. Oh, no, just nudging head. Actually, Pilates isn't 2,000 years old. It's actually quite a modern invention. It's a very good one, but it actually is probably about 40 years old, I think. It's certainly not 2,000. Okay. What about mindfulness? Where does mindfulness really come from? Is mindfulness one of these ancient things that comes from, say, Greek philosophy, or perhaps Hinduism, or maybe Western medicine? Did it come from Buddhism, or has it come actually originally from Christianity? I think we can, yeah, it is Buddhist, it's true. It's a secular version, if you like, of a Buddhist practice. And lastly, the top factor in building resilience. What do you think, if we had to choose one factor in building up our resilience, what might it be? Might it be getting back to drinking a couple of litres of water a day? Might it be eschewing all animal-based food and becoming vegan? Is there any evidence to support that? Might it be having a support network? Or it might be maybe just practicing regular meditation every day, or perhaps it's just getting enough sleep. What do you think? And we're nudging forward on sleep here. Yep, still on sleep. Still on sleep. Okay, the actual answer is social support, but I do think that getting enough sleep is vitally important. I'll come back to social support in just a second. Okay, thank you for participating in the quizzes. I hope you found them a fun thing to do. Let me just talk very briefly about the rest and relaxation part now, before we can start to come to the tail end of this webinar. So firstly, I think it's important not just to think about resting and relaxing as slobbing out and sitting on the settee and watching something that you like on TV. Pleasant as that may be, it probably isn't actually the most constructive thing that we can do to relax, to counter stress. What we probably need to do is recognize in truth that there are 3 different systems in our brains. There is the fight and flight system that I've spoken about, the bit which causes us to be flooded with adrenaline and cortisol and to do the things that we need to do to preserve body and spirit. But actually there is also a separate system in our brains which is associated with what's called the rest and digest response. Now, if you turn off the fight and flight response by simply sitting on the TV and vegging out and watching your favorite soap opera, that isn't necessarily stimulating the second system, the rest and digest response. It's a bit like the brakes and the accelerator on a car. You take your foot off the accelerator. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to slow down, and perhaps you won't slow down for a while. You also have to apply the brakes. So what you might want to think about is, how do you press the brake button more positively? How can you do a rest and digest thing which is better than just simply turning off fight and flight? Okay, pause and plan is what we do when we're thinking things through. So that's the third brain system. The first 2 are the most important. Okay, stress kicks off number 1. The mistake we therefore make is to think of just switching off system 1 as being the most positive thing we could do. Actually, let's stimulate number 2. Let's stimulate the rest and digest system. Technically, if you're interested, that's stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, the one branch of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic, fight and flight, parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. What can we do to really stimulate that? First thing we can do is we can learn breathing exercises. This will be central to things like yoga anyway. But stress makes us breathe in a funny way. We tend to overbreathe, tend to breathe into our chest, and we tend not to actually have a particularly efficient way of breathing. What we need to do if we want to slow ourselves down is to slow our breathing down. The reason for that is that when we overbreathe and we gasp for our air, what we're doing is actually decreasing the amount of carbon dioxide in our bodies. When we decrease the amount of carbon dioxide in our bodies, the paradox is we end up with less oxygen. So if we slow down and relax our breathing, breathe in to the count of 4 and out to the count of 6, and just sit and do that really simple exercise, the elongated out breath, you'd be surprised about how relaxing that can be. And the reason is very simple. When you breathe in, you stimulate the autonomic nervous system, and you actually stimulate the sympathetic branch, and you get a tiny little boost of adrenaline. And when you breathe out, what happens is you stimulate the parasympathetic, and you stimulate that rest and digest system. So you're telling your body that you're more relaxed. And if you're breathing out for a little bit longer than you're breathing in, what happens is that your body concludes that you're more relaxed. You could try the 4 to 6 breathing exercise and just see what it does. A very, very simple thing you can do to stimulate this second system. Great, incidentally, if you've got a digestive disorder. Obviously not great if you've got respiratory problems. It's not one for you. So pressing the pause button is actually possible. There is really lots and lots of evidence from science, from psychology, from psychotherapy, that actually it is possible to press a pause button. It is possible to attend to the way you think. It is possible to attend to what you eat, how you're drinking, what you're eating, how you're exercising. And really that's what mindfulness is in many ways. Mindfulness is putting something in between that which stresses us and how we respond to it. So we lead a life which is a little bit more thoughtful, mindful, has a bit more choice associated with it. Okay, so let's come to the top 10 stress busters in this relatively short, but I hope not too short, webinar. Top 10 stress buster. I said a while ago, and it was part of the quiz actually, and quiz 4, what has research shown to be perhaps the most protective thing any of us can do as human beings to counter the worst impact of stress? And that's to have a good support network around you. So positive social encounters are spending time with the sort of people who you feel good spending time with. Now that could be your friends, could be your family, could be your mosque, could be your church, could be anything. It doesn't really matter. What it is it's a social group upon which you can lean. No person's an island, and that's absolutely true. So we really need to think about who we have in our support network, and be prepared to a certain extent, to lean upon them. Second thing that we can do in a very practical way at work is not take quite so much on. Be a bit more selective about what we do, not try to engage in this idea of continual infinite capacity. Say no every now and again, or as some people say, push back. There's no shame in being selective about what we take on. If we take on too much and play a game with ourselves that we're only any good if we're pleasing everybody and we're absolutely perfect and we're rushing around saying yes to everything, it's a surefire way of getting ourselves over the hill and over the other side of that stress curve. Spending a bit of time in nature is incredibly good. It's well researched that time spent in contact with nature is very, very settling to the mind, body, and the spirit. Doing a bit of that diaphragmatic breathing or that 4 to 6 breathing, like I just mentioned, trying something like meditation. The great thing about meditation is you don't need to go to a class. You don't need to sign up to yoga. You don't need to go to a retreat. You don't need to do any of those things. You can just get an app like Headspace and play with it in your own time. Meditation is nothing more than focused attention on the present. And learning how to do that is something you can do very, very simply. Bit of yoga is often very good. Going for a massage is very good. Releasing some muscular tension. Getting physically active is incredibly helpful. Mild to moderate depression can be alleviated by 3 20-minute exercise routines per week, where you build up a bit of a sweat and lose the capacity to have a normal conversation, so you're getting out of breath. So the protective impact of exercise is huge. Getting your 7 hours sleep, drinking your 2 liters of water, and paying some attention to what you eat. And if you want to research anything, the best research thing to look at is what's called the Mediterranean diet. And variations on that if you're vegan or vegetarian. But the Mediterranean diet, which includes some of those things listed there, try to pay attention to the colors, to the freshness, and to the variety of what you eat. And don't fall into the trap of just thinking that things that are low fat are necessarily healthy. Okay, I think that opens us up for questions.
Listening.
Really interesting, and I have to say aspirational from my perspective. But I would like to encourage anybody, if you've got any questions to ask, you do have a question and answer facility within the webinar. So if anybody has any questions, then please do feel free to type those through. Don't think we have anything at the moment. Okay, so we have a question coming through. For vegetarians, Chris, you mentioned omega-3 as being an essential food type. Well, the question we've got is the source of omega-3 for vegetarians. What would you recommend?
concept. And I use flax. So I either put flax on salad, flaxseed on salad, or I take flax flax capsules.
Is there anything else in general food that omega-3, in general vegetables, vegetarian type of, other than flax, is there anything else that springs to mind?
Flax is one of
It's the highest concentration, to be honest. I don't know anything where you get more of a kick for it. The difficulty with some things is they're in such small quantities, you'd have to eat huge amounts to actually get the beneficial effects. So I think in terms of omega-3, the top way of getting it is oily fish. But of course, again, if you are vegetarian or vegan and you don't eat oily fish for very obvious reasons, then I think the best thing, you don't want to be eating tons and tons of flaxseed on your cereal every morning. So probably the easiest thing. I'm not necessarily a massive fan of having lots and lots of pills, but actually I think a flaxseed is probably fairly innocuous.
That actually was an interesting question from my perspective personally, actually, because my daughter's vegetarian and I'm constantly trying to encourage her to have a healthy diet. Perhaps one that's a little bit more focused on the technology that you mentioned several times in the webinar, mobile phones. I'm sure everybody on the webinar is aware that we are increasingly reliant on our mobile phones for work, and there is an undeniable crossover into our personal lives, both whilst we're at work and whilst we're at home. They both interact throughout the whole of our days these days. Has there been any specific research or evidence on the impact of that?
Yeah, slightly in its infancy, actually, this research. A lot of research based on the use of mobile phones and the need that we have to really make sure that we set some sensible boundaries. The difficulties I think that we have more than anything else is this idea of continual partial attention. So we're constantly slightly distracted. We're constantly slightly on the kind of alert part of the spectrum, where we're expecting the next thing to come in, the next message, the next instant message, the next Facebook posting. And a lot of the evidence has shown that mobile phones, particularly smartphones, have got an impact on us which is quite addictive, releasing tiny little bits of dopamine every time we get a hit with the things, and therefore drawing us into the continual use of them. They're actually very hard things to turn off and put down, and the only thing that I know that we can do really is sensible boundary management. So spend an hour each day with the phone off, if that's the least you can do. Go for a walk without your phone. Put your phone in the desktop drawer at home. Don't have it as your alarm clock. These are very small things, but they can make a massive difference. If we have this continually 24/7 always on feeling, we're just hyper-stimulating our nervous system, so that really doesn't do us a lot of good.
Whilst I'm very conscious of time, I'm keen to make sure everybody's had the opportunity to ask questions. I think one of the themes that seems to be coming through is that there's also this is all about well-being at work. So for the people on the webinar, is there one particular highlight or takeaway that you would suggest that whilst at work would be a great thing for the attendees today to take away into their own workplace? So what sort of advice could the participants today take from today's webinar back to their own workplaces?
Of well-being on the agenda. Make it a topic which is okay to talk about at work, and don't let it be seen as something which is a nice to have, or in any way an organizational luxury item. I think it's absolutely fundamental that we look after ourselves so that we can be as productive as we can, get more done in our personal and our professional lives. And to do that, then, you know, we do have to take account of the fact that we are essentially human and we're not bits of machinery. So our relationships with each other really does count. Our relationships with our boss is particularly important. How we are related to, how we're looked after, how work is allocated to us, and feeling okay about preserving some time for yourself, and also being able to say no. So have a healthy conversation about being healthy.
I would like to personally thank you for what's been a really stimulating webinar. The attendees have been highly active. Thank you all for your participation and your responses to the questions that Chris posed throughout his presentation. To wrap up, I'd just like to finally just say thanks again to Chris, and thanks to the team at the Clear Company for organising this webinar. There's a lot of effort goes into the production of these. The webinar itself will be recorded and will be distributed and available through Clear Assured for Clear Assured users. And if you, as participants, have any further questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us directly at the Clear Company. The telephone number is 01925 407 400, or email us directly at enquiries@theclearcompany.co.uk. So thanks everybody for participating, and it's now time to draw a close to the webinar, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon at the next in the series. Thanks for coming.